The air inside the diner was warm, filled with the familiar scent of coffee, buttered toast, and fried eggs. Outside, the February wind howled against the frosted windows, rattling them slightly, as if begging to be let in. James Walker sat quietly in a corner booth, his worn army jacket draped over his shoulders, the American flag patch still clinging to the sleeve. The jacket had seen deserts, storms, and firefights, and now it shielded him from a different kind of battle, the long, grinding struggle of civilian life. He wasn't here for luxury, just for a simple meal, something warm to keep his strength for the day ahead. But as his plate of scrambled eggs and bacon arrived, his eyes wandered. Not far from him, at a table near the wall, sat 5 children. Their clothes looked secondhand and ill-fitted, some sleeves too short, shoes too thin for the winter chill. The youngest girl, no older than 4, wore pigtails that were uneven, probably tied by her older sister. In the center of their table sat a single plate, one pancake, torn into uneven pieces, divided among them. The oldest boy cut tiny bites to share, his own lips pressed tight as though convincing himself he wasn't hungry. The way they leaned forward, almost reverently, over that single plate told a story James didn't need explained. James felt the ache in his chest before he felt the ache in his stomach. Hunger was something he had learned to ignore during deployments, sometimes going a full day with nothing but a protein bar and water. What pressed on him now wasn't just his own hunger, but the sight of those children quietly fighting theirs. He glanced down at his own plate, golden eggs steaming, bacon crisp, toast buttered and warm. His daughter, Emily, wasn't with him today. She was at a neighbor's house while he tried to run a few errands. He had saved just enough to treat himself to this one breakfast. And yet, as he looked back at the children, he felt the decision was already made. He rose slowly, picked up his plate, and walked toward their table. The oldest boy's eyes darted up, wary at first. James smiled, gentle and disarming, before sliding the plate onto their table. "Looks like you could use this more than me," he said softly. The children froze, their small hands hovering midair, unsure if this was real. The little girl with pigtails blinked at him, her lips parting as though she wanted to say thank you but couldn't find the courage. The oldest boy swallowed hard and whispered, "Are you sure, sir?" James nodded. "Positive. I've had my share of hot meals. Today, it's your turn." The children's faces shifted from disbelief to gratitude, their eyes glistening with unshed tears. They didn't pounce on the food like one might expect. Instead, they shared carefully, passing the plate, each one mindful to make sure the others got enough. Watching them broke something inside James and healed him at the same time. He remembered the battlefield, where soldiers shared rations, sometimes giving their last bite to a brother in arms. That same spirit of sacrifice lived here, in this moment, with strangers who had nothing but each other. A waitress passing by had paused, quietly observing the scene, her hand pressed to her chest. Others in the diner noticed too. Whispers floated around the room, some in awe, some in quiet shame for not having acted first. But James didn't do it for recognition, and he certainly didn't expect applause. He did it because kindness wasn't something you rationed out. It was something you gave freely, especially when someone else needed it more. He stood there for another moment, watching the children smile for the first time that morning as they tasted the eggs and bacon. The littlest one giggled when she got a piece of toast, as though it were the finest feast she'd ever had. That sound, pure, innocent joy, made James smile despite the hollow in his own stomach. Finally, he turned back toward his booth, his steps slower now. He sat down again, clasping his hands together, and gazed out the window. Snowflakes had begun to drift lazily from the gray sky, each one melting against the glass before sliding down. His hunger gnawed at him, but it felt different this time, lighter, somehow easier to carry. His mind drifted to Emily. He pictured her smile, the way she always reminded him of her late mother when she laughed. He thought of how he wanted her to grow up in a world where kindness wasn't rare, where generosity was as natural as breathing. The diner returned to its rhythm. Plates clattered, conversations resumed, but something in the atmosphere had shifted, softened. The waitress brought James a fresh cup of coffee without asking, placing it gently before him. He gave her a small nod of thanks, knowing she understood. For James, This wasn't about heroism or self-pity. He didn't see himself as noble, just human. He knew what it was like to have nothing, to be hungry not only for food but for hope. And in that small moment, by giving away what little he had, he felt richer than he had in years. The 5 children, meanwhile, kept stealing glances at him, their eyes wide with gratitude, as if they'd never forget the man who gave up his breakfast so they could eat. And maybe, James thought, that was enough. If even one of them carried this memory into the future, if one of them remembered the lesson that kindness costs nothing but changes everything, then his hunger today was a price worth paying. The diner bell jingled as someone else entered, the cold wind rushing in. James didn't move, didn't speak. He simply wrapped his hands around the warm cup of coffee and let the heat seep into his fingers. Outside, life went on, but inside his heart, there was a quiet peace. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for now, he knew this truth. Sometimes the smallest sacrifices carry the greatest weight. And though his stomach was empty, his soul had never felt more full. The morning sun streamed through the thin curtains of James's modest apartment, painting golden streaks across the worn carpet. He was still nursing the dull ache in his stomach from the night before, sipping slowly on a cup of black coffee. Emily, his 8-year-old daughter, was humming to herself as she packed her school bag with books, her small hands moving carefully as if the weight of responsibility was far greater than her years. James smiled at her resilience. She deserved so much more than this life of scraping by, but he gave her what he could: love, safety, and the promise that he would never give up on her. A sudden knock broke the quiet rhythm of the morning. James frowned. Visitors were rare. He set his cup down, the sound of ceramic clinking against the chipped table, and walked to the door. When he pulled it open, he froze. Standing on the other side was a woman who seemed out of place in the dimly lit hallway. Her long, elegant coat was tailored to perfection, her heels clicked softly against the floor, and her presence carried a quiet authority that James hadn't felt since standing in front of commanding officers. Her eyes, sharp yet kind, studied him carefully. Behind her, 2 men in suits were unloading large boxes from a truck parked outside. "Mr. Walker?" she asked, her voice calm but warm. James nodded, his hand tightening on the edge of the door. "Yes, ma'am. Can I help you?" "My name is Rebecca Collins," she said. "I was at the diner yesterday." James's stomach dropped. His mind replayed the scene in his head: the children, his plate, the waitress's quiet smile. He hadn't thought anyone important had noticed. He cleared his throat. I'm sorry if I caused any trouble." Rebecca's lips curved into a soft smile. "On the contrary, you reminded me of something I had almost forgotten, that humanity, at its core, is still selfless. I watched you give up your only meal so 5 children could eat. You didn't hesitate, and you didn't expect anything in return. That kind of heart is rare." James shifted uneasily, unsure how to respond. Compliments were harder for him to accept than sacrifices. "They were hungry," he said simply. It was the right thing to do. Rebecca glanced back at the men carrying boxes up the steps. "That's exactly why I'm here. You see, I don't believe kindness should go unnoticed. I've spent years building companies, writing checks, and funding charities, but yesterday, you taught me something. True generosity isn't measured by how much we give from abundance. It's measured by what we give when it costs us something." Before James could find words, Emily appeared at his side, peeking curiously from behind his leg. Her big brown eyes studied the stranger, wary but innocent. Rebecca bent slightly, her gaze softening as she smiled at the little girl. "And you must be Emily." Emily nodded shyly. James rested a protective hand on her shoulder. "She's my whole world," he said quietly. Rebecca straightened again, her tone becoming gentle but firm. "Then she deserves the best you can give her. And I'd like to help with that." She motioned to the men, who set down several boxes filled with food, clothes, and school supplies. James's eyes widened. It wasn't just a few bags, it was enough to last them for months. "Ma'am, this is too much," he stammered, shaking his head. "I can't accept charity. I'm a father. It's my job to provide." Rebecca stepped closer, her voice lowering so only he could hear. "It isn't charity, Mr. Walker. It's recognition. Yesterday, you gave when you had almost nothing. Today, let someone give back to you." James felt his throat tighten. emotion rising despite his effort to hold it back. He opened his mouth, but the words stuck. Rebecca then reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small black case. Inside lay a shiny set of keys. She held them out, her eyes glistening. "These belong to a home I bought not far from here. It's fully furnished, safe, and warm. It's yours now, a gift, for you and Emily." The world seemed to tilt around James. His knees felt weak as he stared at the keys, unable to comprehend what was happening. A home," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Yes," Rebecca replied softly. "No more worrying about rent, no more patching leaks in the ceiling, no more cold nights. You sacrificed without expecting a reward. Let this be proof that sometimes the universe gives back through unexpected hands." Tears burned James's eyes, and he quickly looked away, ashamed of his vulnerability. But Emily's small hand tugged at his, her voice trembling with hope. "Daddy, does this mean we don't have to move again?" James knelt, pulling her into his arms, his voice shaking as he whispered, "That's exactly what it means, baby. We finally have a home." Rebecca stood silently, her own eyes shining as she watched the embrace. She knew then that her wealth, her power, all the luxuries of her life meant little compared to this moment, seeing a father and daughter finally allowed to breathe without fear of tomorrow. When James finally stood, he faced her, his voice heavy with gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you." Rebecca smiled. "Live the way you always have, with kindness. Raise your daughter to know the strength of compassion. That will be thanks enough." The men finished unloading the boxes and returned to the truck. Rebecca extended her hand, and James took it, his calloused fingers closing around hers with quiet strength. It wasn't just a handshake. It was a promise, a bridge between two lives that fate had crossed for a reason. As the truck pulled away, James and Emily stood at the doorway surrounded by boxes of new beginnings. The keys to their future rested in his palm, heavier than any medal he'd ever received, because this one wasn't for bravery on the battlefield. It was for humanity in its purest form. For the first time in years, James felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The road ahead would still have challenges, but now there was hope, real and tangible, shining like sunlight after a long night. He looked down at Emily, who was still holding his hand tightly, her face lit with a smile that made his heart ache with joy. And as he closed the door behind them, James realized something profound. A single act of kindness, no matter how small, has the power to change lives, not just for those who receive it, but for those who witness it. Yesterday, he had fed hungry children. Today, his family had been fed with hope. And tomorrow, who knew how far that ripple of kindness would travel?